My name is Jules Purnell, and I am an intimacy coach and also a cuddle therapist practitioner. I wanted to create this quick video to introduce the concept of what cuddle therapy is, because not a lot of people have heard of it or thought of something that they could utilize, but once they hear about it, they're like, oh, that sounds amazing. I would love to do that. So let me explain a little bit more about what cuddle therapy is, why I got into it, and what kind of clients I'm seeking and what might be a good fit for you. So you might be seeking cuddle therapy if you're somebody that is just feeling touch starved. A lot of us don't get touched nearly enough in our day-to-day lives. In fact, there's a phenomenon called skin hunger, which basically is exactly what it sounds like. Our human skin really wants to be touched. There's a reason why all of the skin on our body is so full of nerve endings and receptors that feel positive to touch. It's actually good for our physical health and for our mental health. And if we don't have enough touch, it can have negative ramifications on both our physical and mental health. So if you're feeling really burnt out, really stressed, or just like you haven't been touched enough lately, that's a perfectly fine reason in and of itself to go into cuddle therapy. There are some other reasons why people might want to go into cuddle therapy. For example, if you have been working on certain intimacy issues within what I call neck up therapy, so therapy where touch is not involved, if you've been seeing a psychotherapist, for example, or you've been doing EMDR or some other kind of neck up therapy, and you are finding that the integration between mind and body is still not quite happening, that's a really great reason to get into cuddle therapy. Another reason is perhaps you've experienced some kind of trauma around touch and you want to come back into a space where touch feels good, touch feels welcoming and safe rather than something to be afraid of. Through a therapeutic process, you can get there without having to rush right into a relationship with a new person. So you can build those skills with a professional practitioner who's able to hold some of that trauma with you so that you can process through it together. Another thing is that I am a member of queer and trans community. I'm a polyamorous person. I'm a kinky person. If you're somebody that wants to see a practitioner who understands the culture that you're coming from, your background, your identity, if you're worried about feeling stigmatized by going to another practitioner who's not part of those communities, I welcome you. This is a safe space. I also am somebody who is neurodivergent, and I know that for a lot of people, different forms of touch don't interact very nicely with neurodivergence all the time. There can be some touch that feels really bad sometimes, and maybe it feels better or more tolerable other times. Helping to lab that out in a professional container can be really, really helpful. I do this work for a number of reasons. For one thing, I am a survivor of different forms of interpersonal violence and trauma. And I know that for myself, a lot of my healing had to happen in my body. I could only keep it up here for so long. And in fact, I found that by only intellectualizing, so only using my mind to think about these problems and try to work through it, my brain and my body weren't talking to each other anymore. And that's something that I think can happen to a lot of us, especially who grew up in the US. We're not always taught to think about our bodies as part of us. We can sometimes see ourselves as separate from our bodies, which isn't the case at all. We're part of it. Our brain is still part of our body. So by splitting those things out, I think we can actually do more harm than good. I think that when we're in the early stages of recovering from certain forms of trauma, it is safer and it does make sense to keep it in the mind. But if we don't talk to our bodies, we're not doing the full work of healing. And so that's the main reason why I got into this work. I saw so many avenues for healing and offering that healing to others in the same way that I have experienced that. I've seen a couple of touch practitioners and other practitioners that work in the body and try to get you out of your mind. And I've seen the benefits myself. So it's something that I want to offer to others. A typical session is actually going to differ from person to person in terms of what their needs are. Generally speaking, there's a screening process that you'll go through. So I'll ask you some questions to determine if we're a good fit. And if we're not, then I can always refer you to another practitioner that might still good be. I'm not just going to leave you hanging. So we'll go through that initial screening process. And then once we find a time to meet, you'll come into my practice space and we will talk about what we might want to do during that session. We'll go over our code of ethics, which are very specific in terms of what to expect and what are unexpected behaviors during a cuddle session. And then we will do some grounding together to get ourselves centered and into our bodies. And then each session, each cuddle session is client led. So depending on what you want to need in that given moment, that's where you're going to be in the driver's seat. And this is where I think it's especially important for people that have not had the opportunity to voice their desires or even get in touch with what their desires are. They might be like, that sounds fantastic. What if I don't know what I want? That'll be part of the work that we do together is to discover what is your body desiring? What are you needing? Is it just being listened to? Do you just want to be held while you talk? Do you want to have your hands touched and held? Do you want to have your face caressed? Whatever it is, we'll do the work together to interrogate what is that need that's coming from your body and how can we be responsive to that need? And then once our session is over, we'll sit and discuss maybe briefly what we liked, what we didn't like about the session, and then make plans for if we'd like to meet again. And generally speaking, after session two, I will do a follow-up just to debrief a little bit and see how you're feeling. Because there are things that can arise during session that might be unexpected, and you're not really sure what to do with them or where to put those feelings. So we'll have that conversation on the back end of the session as well. I want to talk a little bit about COVID. And I know for many of us, we're so tired of talking about and thinking about and dealing with the day-to-day ramifications of COVID still. But one thing I've noticed is that ever since COVID, we have been more disconnected from each other than ever. And that continues to this day. It was especially true during lockdown when the world felt like it was shut down and nobody was able to see each other. I still feel like we're experiencing the lingering ramifications of that time. What I mean by that is that people seem so disconnected and estranged from their own needs and from one another, and people still feel like they're not having a really amazing time connecting with each other. In fact, there is what's called a loneliness epidemic that's been happening globally, but especially here in the US, this is something that I feel very concerned about. A lot of young people, members of so-called Gen Z, so people who are in their, mid 20s to, on the younger end in high school right now, there is this big disconnect of loneliness. A lot of that is because we're living so much of our lives on social media and on our phones that we're not participating in public spaces with each other, or we just may never have even developed the foundational skills to have friendships, have a thriving social life. Much more so for those who are interested in engaging in any kind of an intimate relationship. I'm going to use intimacy very, very specifically here. What I mean when I'm talking about intimacy is being close, being physically close in a way that feels mutually pleasurable, may or may not include erotic energy. Erotic energy, I'm categorizing more as in the realm of sexual. It has erotic intention. It's trying to get to a certain place of sexual arousal. Separate from that is this other form of intimacy that I think a lot of people just don't know how to practice. People are not very practiced in learning how to navigate any kind of physical intimacy with their friends, with dates, with partners. A lot of times I see people participating in hookup culture to try to get those intimacy needs met. The problem with that is that hookups aren't always that intimate. It's not very common for people that are hooking up to say, I've had a really hard day. Can you just hold me while I talk about my bad day? Or, I don't think that I'm interested in sex right now. Can we just cuddle? That's pretty unusual for a hookup. A lot of times people even say, that feels too intimate for me. I just want the sex part. I would argue that it's almost a bit of a misfire. We're looking for something in the wrong place. We're trying to get a need fulfilled with something that really isn't scratching the itch. And so one of the things that I love to offer in this practice is the ability to practice being physically intimate without it being inherently sexual. that might happen in a relationship. We might go from a place of physical intimacy to deciding that, okay, I want to explore sexuality. But I think that there's a lot that's missing for a lot of people in terms of how do I go from not touching a person to touching them? What are sort of the quote unquote rules of engagement? I think for a lot of people, especially those that didn't receive any kind of sex ed around consent specifically, there's a big gap. I think we've heard that yes means yes and no means no, which is great and true and very much needed in terms of a conversation around sexual violence, which had not been happening before that. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of nuance and there's not a lot of education around, well, what if I'm not sure what I want? How do I ask for something and see if the other person's interested? Because a lot of people are so fearful of rejection because they perceive that rejection as I've already violated someone's boundaries by asking for something that was quote unquote inappropriate. When a lot of times those inappropriate asks aren't actually inappropriate. It's okay to ask someone for something and for them to say no and for the relationship to be intact. But I think for a lot of younger people or people who are part of LGBTQ plus community, there is this worry that if I approach somebody and I'm rebuffed, that means that I've done something wrong. I've hurt them or I've upset them in some way. And so we just don't ask at all. I know for a lot of people who are assigned female at birth or were assumed female and raised that way, there is also this added layer of I don't actually have the skills to ask for what I want. I was never encouraged to do that. I was given no scripts to be able to say, this is what I want. Would you do this with me? So this is one of the major reasons why I think cuddle therapy and platonic touch work can actually be extremely beneficial, especially if you don't have a partner. Maybe you've never had a partner and you're concerned, you're like, oh, I'm getting on in my age and I've never experienced this kind of intimate touch with anyone. And it feels overwhelming to even know where to begin. This is a fantastic reason to work with me as a cuddle professional and as an intimacy coach. We can talk about those things. What are your goals? Where would you like to get to ultimately? And if I can help you get there, then I've done my job. That's fantastic. That's my main goal is to help set you up for healthy ongoing relationships. If you're interested in booking with me to talk about any of the above that I just discussed, I'm going to put my information in the info of this video, and I really hope to hear from you soon.